Good afternoon and welcome to our next panel, Cross-Border Harmonized Model-Driven Reporting in Derivatives Markets. I'm your moderator, Nick Wakefield, co-founder of Regulation Asia. In response to the 2008 global financial crisis, one of the G20 reforms was to mandate the reporting of OTC derivatives transactions to trade repositories with the goal of improving transparency and lowering systemic risk. Currently, multiple jurisdictions are still working on additional rule amendments to achieve greater harmonization of the data requirements and enhance global risk monitoring. To discuss this today, I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. Orgaz-Barnier is Senior Manager within the Market Infrastructure Group at the Australia Securities and Investments Commission, otherwise known as ASIC. He leads the unit responsible for overseeing the Australian futures markets and OTC trading and reporting infrastructure, including licensing and supervising trade repositories and administering the Australian derivatives transaction reporting rules. Welcome, Alex. Dawd Haque is Global Lead for the CEO Regulatory Market Initiatives function at Deutsche Bank. He represents Deutsche Bank on multiple trade association committees and working groups within ISDA, FIA, GFMA, and ICMA. Welcome, Dawd. Emma Kalliomaki is Managing Director of the Derivatives Service Bureau, DSB, an organization founded by the Association of National Numbering Agencies, now working in collaboration with the industry for provision of data standards for identification of over-the-counter OTC derivatives. Welcome, Emma.
Yes.
And Dr. Ruddy Vincent is a Director for Data and Digital Solutions at ISDA. As a digital project manager, he manages the Common Domain Model, an ISDA global initiative that will aid the financial industry digital agenda by standardizing how financial transactions are traded and managed across the trade lifecycle. Welcome, Ruddy.
Morning.
So, we'll start by taking an overarching look at the OTC derivatives landscape. Alex, I'll kick off with you. I think our audience will be interested to hear perhaps an update on your side with regards to the developments in Australia, but also the work you're doing alongside other regulatory bodies in the region. I think you're on mute, Alex. Yep.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, as you mentioned before, many jurisdictions worldwide, including ASIC, are currently in the thick of the process of harmonizing our derivatives trade reporting rules with international standards. As many stakeholders, probably some of the viewers would know, this is not an easy task, both for regulators and for industry. And for that reason, ASIC is doing it by issuing several consultations, the second of which will be issued in the next few weeks, less than a month, with our proposed final rules. We are also proposing a phased industry implementation timetable. At a high level, the principles that are guiding us throughout this project are, first of all, maximum international alignment. Second, we're hoping and we are confident that these new rules will contribute to data quality improvement. And as always, we are trying to strike the appropriate balance between commercial considerations, cost for industry, and the regulatory needs and outcomes. We will also take the opportunity to simplify the rule set by eliminating or consolidating into the rules some of the existing exemptions. Just touching on this issue of a staggered implementation, we will be asking industry to implement UTI and LEI first by October 2023 is the plan, with a further 16-month implementation time for critical data elements. Our timetable is trying to be consistent with our general fast follower approach. We aim to be a fast follower to the major jurisdictions. And regionally, as you mentioned, we are trying to align our efforts with other major jurisdictions in the region, and particularly with Singapore, Japan, and Hong Kong. We hold frequent and regular workshops and meetings with the regulators in these jurisdictions, with the aim of achieving consistent approaches where possible. Consistency not only in the timetable, but also in our responses to the problems that arise. For instance, on UTI and determination of the sooner jurisdiction, we have had extensive meetings and testing solutions with Asian regulators to achieve, a common approach and a common solution to the problem.
Thanks, Alex. Emma, given that DSB has a key role in being the sole provider of UPIs, perhaps you can talk a little to what you're seeing across various markets, implementation timelines, and some of the work you and the team are doing there.
Yes, most definitely. So since the DSB's designation by the Financial Stability Board, now we're operating under the governance of the Regulatory Oversight Committee. So the authority is also responsible for oversight of the LEI system. We've been working with the authorities and market participants, as well as within the ISO standard development process, to progress the components needed to build a jurisdiction agnostic solution. If we think really about the scale of the initiative, so the FSB and the G20 jurisdictions have been working in the years since the financial crisis to realise the change needed for increased supervision, the improved data quality, transparency across the markets. And there has been a real focus on collaboration with industry to progress standardisation in this area. So along with the LEI, the UTI, the critical data elements, the UPI is a critical data standard necessary to improve the data alignment and harmonisation across jurisdictions. For the DSB, this has really resulted in continued collaboration with authorities, the industry representation groups, to develop the product templates, meaning that the data attributes required for consistent generation and searching of the UPIs, as well as the associated data, and also the workflows associated with the connectivity and the access that the end users will need. So in order to ensure that we can deliver the most effective and friendly solution, we've been using industry consultations. We've been working with the industry representation groups, as well as that observer role from the authorities. We've had several webinars in conjunction with those authorities, and it has been great representation really from the Asia Pacific region, which is really important to have the feedback for shaping the service. As some people would know, the OTC ISIN solution that the DSB delivers today is very much European-centric for the European regulations. So it is really great that we're getting this broader interest now, because we know how important that will be for industry readiness and preparations as the UPI service is built off that harmonisation with the OTC ISIN service. Now, as far as implementation timelines, so everyone is aware there's currently no firm mandates in place. A ROC progress report, which was published early in the year at the end of January, highlighted that foreseen shift in mandates coming into effect. So originally they were foreseen by Q3 2022, and now we're looking at that being shifting a year to Q3 2024. For jurisdiction specific news, we heard from the CFTC earlier in the year that they're expecting to launch and be the first jurisdiction to introduce UPI in roughly Q3 2024. The European mandate, we're waiting for that. It's been with the European Commission since December 2020, and we are expecting that to come in the coming months. Similarly with the UK, their consultation wrapped up at the end of February, and so again, we're expecting their final report to come out within the coming months. As Alex just mentioned, we've heard ASIC will be publishing their second consultation and proposing their final rules in the coming weeks. So we are starting to see that traction, and the Asia Pacific region, synchronizing their implementation and working together is really a great move on that harmonization and data consistency. So that increasing interest of the market participants is really encouraging. And although there's no firm mandate, the DSB is very much listening to industry as to what's needed for implementation. So on that basis, we're looking to launch the UAT environment 9 months before any major derivatives jurisdiction goes live, and then launch the production environment 3 months before any mandate goes live. So this is really to give industry the time they need for connecting, ensuring everything is good to go before the mandates come into effect.
Thanks very much, Emma. A very comprehensive overview. Now, Dawd, you've spent a long time kind of across various working groups, liaising with regulators, and I'm sure very active in the various consultations that have been taking place. What's the picture from your point of view as to how things have been developing, perhaps with that focus on APAC and the work industry and the regulators are doing that side of things?
Well, Thank you for inviting me, Nick, and it's a pleasure to be here. It was really good to hear from Alex and Emma. I've worked with Emma for quite some time now on many of the standards, including at the DSB and a product committee, and the engagement of our regulators and the regulatory infrastructure has been revolutionary. I haven't seen anything like this since I started in the industry a very long time ago. So we're definitely moving in the right direction there from a collaboration perspective, and a regulated and regulator listening forums have been brilliant for that. Like most of these things, it was very slow starting. So if we think back to when I began this journey with the FSB in 2014, you know, that's like 12 years ago now, 14 years ago. We 10 years ago, we just we started with a few white papers, and we're now moving into the final stages of the plans for design from the regulators of what we're needing to achieve. We're seeing a concatenation of the requests from the regulators and a squeezing of resources, because everyone wants to get over the line very quickly now, which is causing a challenge for all the banks, because we're seeing many regulators coming out with their rules and in a relatively short timescale. Now, in and of itself, that wouldn't be a problem. But when we consider that there is a great deal of regulatory infrastructure from CCPs, CSDs, trade repositories in our ecosystem that also need to evolve and change with the new regulatory landscape, it's impacting a great deal of what we do front to back. And because it's happening not in just one jurisdiction, but in every jurisdiction within which we trade, that creates a challenge of resourcing and skills. There are just so many people in the market who have the ability to do this work. And so we're trying to balance where we go first. So even though we are trying now to move into a stage of implementation, we want to caution the regulators not to put everything at the same time, and be aware and sensitive to other jurisdictions that are going live, and try to create some kind of orchestration so that we don't, everybody doesn't go live at the same time. Now, it's interesting what Alex said about the coordination between the regulators in Asia. We've seen that for some time now, and I really like that. I like the approach they're taking, because not only are they doing it in a coordinated manner and choreographed, they're also being sensitive to how the market works, and they're listening to what's happening in Asia, in Europe and America, and waiting to see to an extent what happens there. And they're trying to create a symbiotic relationship between the two, which is what we need to see. And because a lot of our trades cross border, and they'll impact more than one jurisdiction at the same time. And the unique issues with Asia are its time zone. So when we think about trading in Asia, they wouldn't necessarily be the first jurisdiction within which we have to report. And we're trying to reduce the number of reports we need to make, because that reduces friction, reduces operational and regulatory risk. So we are very appreciative of Alex's work and the work of the other regulators in this jurisdiction, in this region.
Thanks, Dawd. Alex, I just want to come back to you there. Some obviously some positive comments, but also some words of advice, I guess, for regulators. Obviously, you're just one regulator there in Australia, but do you have any thoughts on
that? On what just Dawd said, I mean, yeah, I agree that, look, we are jurisdictions that are smaller compared to the US and Europe, and our ability to influence this is to influence where they go. It's limited, but what we can do is work together to try to provide responses that are comprehensive and not further fragment the reporting requirements. I mean, we're trying to minimize the amount of ASIC Australian only or ASIC only data fields. From the set of 125 fields that we are consulting on, only 5% are Australia specific, and the remaining 95% is common to either the CDE or the CFTC or ESMA fields. So for an Australian reported entity that operates
I think we've lost Alex, I believe. Oh dear. Okay. So I mean, Alex was just touching on fragmentation and data and such, which is a nice segue to kind of moving on to talking about perhaps the areas of technology and data challenges. Alex, you're back. Sorry.
And divergence of implementation timeframes. As I mentioned before, mentioning the fast follower approach, we're also cognizant. And don't mention this. All these rules are coming out at the same time, and that is a challenge. But we're also hearing from industry that a common multi-jurisdiction big bang in terms of implementation dates is the preferred or desired approach by industry. So that's not easy, considering international implementation dates vary and also sometimes move. We are keeping a close eye on the international timetable and try to align as much as possible. Looks like UTI will be in the US from December this year, in the EU from October 2023. And regarding CDEs, as I said, we are regionally trying to align our efforts with Singapore, Japan, and Hong Kong. I think the preference of the regulators, for all the regulators in this region, is to aim at a common implementation date.
Thank you, Alex. Moving on to kind of the technology and data challenges in the industry. There are obviously a few, but to name areas that are interesting, one is ensuring obviously data harmonization, which we just kind of touched on across jurisdictions. Also, how do we seek more collaboration and cross-border harmonization there? Secondly, ensuring that firms seek obviously better automation and efficiencies in the OTC derivatives market. I want to just touch on that second challenge. Ruddy, with your role at ISDA, looking after the various digital initiatives, including the common domain model, perhaps you can speak to some of the work you're doing there and how it might address some of the areas that we've been talking about.
Nick, thank you for inviting me for these discussions. And yes, certainly I'm happy to share some of my personal observations based on some of the work we do at ISDA. And one resonating point through this panel is that the timeline, the fact that many changes are coming through the pipeline across major jurisdictions this year, 2022, and also the upcoming few years. So this has prompted a keen interest in the concept of digital regulatory reporting, because it promises greater consistency across the firms, across systems, improvements on the quality of the data made available to the regulators. So in effect, regulatory reporting has become increasingly complex and expensive for regulated institutions. So in addition, there is poor quality reporting, and all the delayed data can create challenges for the authorities. So this concern, combined with the challenges of complying with new and amended reporting obligations in different jurisdictions over the next few years, have become very powerful drivers, motivators for DRR initiatives, and effectively both in the public as well as the private sector, to strive for concrete, scalable, unambiguous, and standardized industry solutions. So at ISDA, we're working with market participants on a mutualized industry-wide digital regulatory reporting initiative to effectively turn regulations into code. So this is a very shifting paradigm, and this work is really going full steam ahead, particularly for the amended US CFTC regulations, CFTC rewrite, as well as the EMIR refit in Europe with regard to trade reporting requirements. So the objective is to enable the firms to interpret and implement at warp speed regulatory reporting rules, but consistently via this human readable and machine executable type of logic, type of code. And we do this using the common domain model, that is the CDM for short. So by way of a quick introduction for those who are not necessarily familiar with the CDMs, so it is a free and open source, human readable and machine executable data model for financial transactions, as well as for representing processes and representing the calculations that pertains to the performance of these transactions. So it introduces the digital representations of trade agreements, trade events across the life cycle of these transactions for a broad set of financial products. And most importantly, it is designed to be fully agnostic of technology and fully compatible with messaging standards. So by creating common digital representations of events and processes that occur throughout the trade life cycles, the CDMs effectively allows market participants to achieve greater consistency in the processing of the trade and the interpretation and implementations of complex business requirements, complex regulatory requirements. So we've used this concept of the CDM. We are using this concept of CDM across multiple use cases in terms of affirmation, complex, in terms of calculation, as I mentioned, in terms of the margin requirements, use cases, exploring how to represent collateral schedule, etc. And with regard to the generation and categorization of risk and capital data. Now, the CDM can be used also in other contexts, like the clearing rule books, in terms of digitizing that business logic to determine whether which trade should be cleared, in terms also in analyzing legal agreements, the data underpinning the legal agreement across portfolio to determine the specific risk or the features of that portfolio. Now, zooming into the context of regulatory reporting, we are collaborating with the industry to effectively eliminate the inconsistencies that emerge when each firm takes its own interpretations of a written set of rules. We start transitioning to mutualizing the implementation efforts to avoid the need for applying some resources into reviewing, into redesigning, in terms of building reporting logic from scratch. There is actually a great opportunity for reusability, for scalability. And as I mentioned, we are looking at the first regulation in our side is indeed the CFTC rewrite coming up in the latter part of this year, collaborating with 40 plus large institutions, market infrastructure and vendors, buy side, sell side. They are effectively, literally digitizing the regulations into code to help the industry overall broadly to comply with these amendments. Another initiative is the EMIR REFIT, working with the same market incumbents to digitize, to reflect on the requirements from ESMA. We are aiming this time for the timeline of 2023, 2024. But the scope of this work stream effectively include the mandate requirement also for the ISO 20022. So we are really looking at the full picture of the business logic, the regulatory logic that reflect the regulations, the ability to extract and pinpoint the data that is intended to be reported, as well as the messaging requirements so as to make that data available and accessible to the regulators. And that certainly will cater for the UPR requirement that Emma touched on. So a key principle, just to close, is that the scalability is key. Digitize once, reuse everywhere. And we are embedding that approach across our effort with the industry.
Excellent, thank you, Rudy. Quite some initiative then. Emma, you're with DSB involved in kind of this side of things as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I can really echo the sentiment that's been expressed by Ruddy there. And given the pace of regulatory change, which we've seen just continue over the years, there is that demand from stakeholders for a need of a scalable, automated solution, leveraging the synergies, which then result in the data consistency, improved data quality, and the efficiency gains and cost savings really across the industry. And that mutualization and collaboration effort is really key. This has been a driver for the DSB's initiative, where we're exploring open source standards for defining machine readable workflows and specifications in order for firms to be able to communicate with each other. We see this as being very compatible with ISDA's CDM, so that industry collaboration we think is key from the market utilities or infrastructures as well as the end users. Now, as Ruddy already touched on, so this approach that we're looking at would make the regulatory rules available through machine readable sources, meaning individual users would not need to interpret and implement the rules individually. And so that really pushes the harmonization, consistency, and the improved data quality.
Excellent. Dawd, you're at the coalface when it comes to a global bank responding to a variety of jurisdictional requirements. What are some of the areas that you're focusing on? And at the same time, where are you seeing some of those bottlenecks? And also, where are you seeing progress being made?
Before I go into that, the CDM is a game changer for the industry in general. We, as Deutsche Bank, are very much supportive of the rollout of CDM. We see that as a huge improvement for our clients who are struggling with regulatory change, because they it takes a great deal of manpower and cost to implement ever-changing regulations. So I applaud Ruddy and ISDA for that. And I'm obviously working with Emma on the DSB version of the same, and I can see them both as being very compatible going forwards. So I'm really encouraged by their words. Moving into the global picture. So it's all about standards. We have been banging on for years about creating a foundation globally of standards. And it's really good to see ISO becoming the center of that now. For transparency, I sit on ISO IST 12, which is the UK Financial Services ISO Committee. I'm on TC68, AG5, which is a digital financial ecosystem committee. And we're working on propagating these standards like ISO 20022 for payments, the LEI, the UPI, the UTI. These are all standards that all of our regulators are adopting globally. And it is going to be the key for how we talk to each other going forwards, not just in what I would like to call the analog financial ecosystem, but also when we move into our digital platforms. We all need a consistent way of knowing who each other are and what our action is going to be within that process. So these are all key. The LEI for me is the lobstone that everything sits around. It's understanding who you are and who you're trading with. Now, it's great to hear from Alex that the adoption of the LEI and the pushing out of the LEI and the using of the LEI going forwards. What, in my conversations with the GLEAF and Stefan Wolf, who's the CEO there, has always been about adoption. It's all about getting adoption. Now, in the US and the EU, in the EU in particular, we found a higher level of adoption than we have in Asia up to now because of the mandates from regulation. And so in the future, we're obviously going to see that from ASIC, MAS and HKMA, which is great. And maybe even the GFSA will go that far as well. I know that already China has had a huge improvement in LEI adoption. Main reason being is that they put the LOU, which is the local operating unit who publishes LEIs, into their business registry. And so from the birth of a financial organization, from a firm, they have an LEI. It's also to be noted that it's free. So it's not seen, as it is in other jurisdictions, as a tax on the financial economy. So it's key that we get it propagated, used, not just in the reporting use space, but also in other financial reporting, in their just daily lives of how a business runs. The second one I'd like to say around is the fact that we're now moving into the CDE, the Critical Data Element Data Dictionary, which is the CPM IOSCO dictionary for regulatory transactions. Now, I'd like to see that rolled out further. So away from just purely the systemic risk reporting and into other areas such as stability risk, also into other things like SFTR and or the version of security-based swaps or other areas of reporting which we do. to regulators, and so that we can start to reuse the same dictionary and these same descriptions over and over again. And that again comes down to what Ruddy was talking about with the CDM, the adaptability and scalability of a solution which can use the same set of language and vocabulary to report in multiple different areas that the regulator needs. Eventually, we would like to move to a point where we only report once, and it's across multiple different regulatory obligations to increase efficiency and reduce operational and regulatory risk. And that's where we're going. If I'm thinking about more in terms of the big risks we've got, it's around the divergence. Now, I know Alex was saying that we are looking at the moment, at ASIC in particular, very sensitive about that. Unfortunately, not all regulators have Alex's viewpoint, and some of them have gone a bit their own way. So we're looking at relatively 70-75% adoption rates from the CDE. Now, that in itself seems quite high, because you think, okay, that's only 25% different. But it's that 25% difference which is the difference. Suddenly, you don't have alignment, you have disharmony, and you have divergence, which means that we can't create a single efficient way of reporting in. So I think once we go through this phase of adoption, we're going to have to sit back with the regulators and work out what those fuzzy edges are and what they're used for, and how we can maybe send a core set of data elements to everybody and then send the delta of these differences separately to each regulator while we work out what it is they're actually needing these data points for, and how we can do it much more efficiently in a better way than we are today. And also, we've got to think about who does the reporting a bit more. At the moment, many of our regulators are dual-sided reporting, and we think that that is an anchor against growth of our economy, because the small medium enterprises, they're the ones who drive the economy forwards. They're the ones who need the money now, and they're the ones who don't necessarily have the skills and the knowledge of how to do this reporting. So when we do dual-sided reporting, we find a great deal of the errors come from that side, and it's not to lay blame. It's more to say, well, really, should they even be doing any reporting at all? And maybe we need to just rework the whole dual-sided reporting regime and say only one side reports. The other side may even do some validation of some of the economic points and stuff. But we can get back into that, with the regulators once we go live with this phase of regulations. The last thing I'd like to say is something that Emma said earlier, which is the rate of change of regulation. Now, we have gone through so many iterations of change in regulations over the last, since 2008. Well, actually, it started before that, but since 2008, which is now, 14 years. That it's very hard to keep up. And the cost of continual change is a drag on the economy. So what we would like to do is create a new flexible framework where, as our ecosystem and as our products and markets change, we can create a more flexible regulatory environment that doesn't need to be updated wholesale like it has been every single time. And we can add on, bolt on new bits, such as, and I'm sure we'll go on to this hopefully in a moment, around crypto, right? Crypto is a new asset class, some would argue, or a new currency, and we don't want to have to remake the whole wheel again when that starts to get traction in the economy.
Excellent, thank you, Dad. Alex, I want to, and we will touch on kind of your kind of latter points in the next section. Alex, I want to come back to you. You've heard from Ruddy and Emma and Dawd on some kind of points there around fragmentation, harmonization, common domain models, etc. What's your kind of feedback or thoughts or perspectives on this?
Yeah, look, I agree with many of the things that Dawd has said. In Australia, we have a dual reporting, but we also have delegated reporting. And, for instance, around LEI, the report, we allowed some identifiers that were not LEI, but now we're seeing that the percentage of non-reporting counterparties that are identified by the reporting counterparties using the LEI as opposed to all client code or other acceptable identifiers has grown since October 18 from 46% to October 2021, 66%. So there's a momentum in adoption of LEI by entities in Australia that we hope that the mandate doesn't cost an excessive burden, and it goes kind of with the grain. On the other points, just to reiterate what I've said before around, we are supporting the adoption of standards. We think is the right way, as that was saying, and all these initiatives from Anna, from ISDA. We are particularly with ISDA. We are in. We've had preliminary conversations around their model. We're very happy to be engaged. Any initiative that avoids some of the issues that Dawd was mentioning in terms of the divergence of reporting requirements and increases the efficiency, reduces the error, reduces the cost and the effort from entities, is something that we're willing to engage with and support.
Thank you, Alex. I want to now move the conversation on. I guess we've got about 10 minutes or so left to the kind of thinking about the future, I guess, thinking about trying to kind of build a future-proof framework in this space. I mentioned at the start, and as you all know, this is something that's so far been developing for about 14 years or so, and I'm sure much more to come. So how do we create systems and processes and standards that can be easily future-proofed? And whatever that future might look like. I actually had the good fortune of hosting a panel session in February at our crypto regulation event. And I did a panel focused on institutional crypto trading, where the focus was on derivatives, and obviously we covered quite a lot there. It brings up the bigger conversation around what our future kind of financial markets will be trading and how we'll identify, report, and more. Dawd, I just want to come back to you and kind of to some of the points you raised on this. And just get a sense of what are some of the big conversations that you're having in the market around the future of the markets and the future of various frameworks, tools, technologies, and processes that are currently kind of being designed and built at the moment.
Well, I hope we have a lot more than 10 minutes. So what we're looking at the moment is, okay, the big things right now are cryptocurrencies, tokens, DeFi, decentralized finance, about the digital economy and the ecosystem, and how we can create trust between market participants while continuing to protect privacy. And that's the game-changing difference between something like Bitcoin, where you have a public wallet, and the private ecosystem of financial services as they are today, where you don't know who the players are, and everyone has a set of clients which they hold almost like a secret source. So something we spoke about yesterday, Nick, with Alex as well, and Ruddy was there, and Emma, was at the moment, no regulatory body has the ability to have crypto derivatives reported to them. We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the reporting regime, we don't have the identifiers. So if we did trade a Bitcoin ETF today, for example, there is no way to report that in any jurisdiction at all. So what we're doing is not we being my bank, but certainly the wider ecosystem. What's happening today is opaque risk is being built within the ecosystem, which the regulator has no sight of. So what we need to do in short order is work out how we are going to start reporting this thing. Maybe in the current framework, how do we so at the moment you've got the CFTC saying that this is a commodity. You've got Europe saying that these are currencies. You've got other jurisdictions that haven't said anything yet and are just silent on the whole issue. We've also got the growth now of CBDCs, which is central bank digital currencies, with a first issuance coming very, very soon, where we're going to go into the big wholesale market now. So suddenly we're going to see trades. I mean, instead of it being in the retail space, which is all cryptocurrencies today, and frankly, it would be quite hard to build up systemic risk in a space like that at the present time. So I'm not too worried. But once we get into a CBDC, we're going to see trades of hundreds of millions, if not billions, on a daily basis as we start to trade on the back of treasuries and US securities, or, for example, on the back of any central bank issuance, sovereign debt. So we need to get up to speed very quickly with a set of standards and bodies getting together and working out what we're going to call this stuff, if it's going to be a new asset class, and how it's going to get reported. And that's the conversations I'm having right now.
Yeah, and Ruddy, I mean, we had ISDA speak at the event, and ISDA was mentioned quite a few times on the session that I was hosting. You know, that's something that you've kind of been exploring and been involved in. When you're kind of building and designing all the various models and technology architectures, what are some of the things that you're kind of thinking about to ensure that there is that future proofing and forward-looking perspective on these kind of areas?
Well, yes, there's many different exciting business opportunities, product coming on the market, coming online, and many firms latching on to the different concepts. And there could be many different points to call upon. I think if I had to reach out for my top 5 recently, I would say that the design principle have to be agnostics of the technology and fundamentally anchored in a kind of bottom-up approach that looks at the data first and then build from that to foster a functional composability, assemble a building block, create your more complex product, understand the reporting logic, codify that in a standardized manners and consistently. The second one would be the technological governance, meaning the oversight that ensures that the reporting requirement and more generally the business and regulatory reporting logic can be digitized and implemented cohesively to leverage both the depth and the breadth of what is already in place today. We've realized we already have the data in many places, and even for new product, it's just a matter of understanding, okay, how do we make use of what we have, then expand when and if necessary, or organically, consistently in terms of additional data, in terms of additional technology or processes. Thirdly, the element of auditable traceability to a digital first legal and regulatory compliance framework, because that enables the same underlying flexible standardized data model to express in a machine executable and readable code these requirements and set the right setup to look at what's the requirement today to align with expectation of regulators, but also what is to come and what we have at our disposal. And this is something we're also doing at ISDA, looking at digitizing legal document, like the master agreement, design definitions, collateral agreement, etc. Fourthly is the element of an open, and this is very important, the transitioning from do-it-yourself to a more open and engaged, practical and sustainable collaboration across the stakeholders, across the banks, the market infrastructures, the vendors, lawyers, the traders, the operation people, the technologists, and more importantly, with a direct feedback loop with the regulators. This is our joint efforts to really move quickly across those very exciting opportunities. And just to finish, my final point, perhaps, in my observation is in terms of ensuring that we leverage the industry-led standardized models safely, in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of access, but as early as possible. It is the time now to move on to those opportunities to solve tangible pain points and to accommodate for the features of the new products that Dawd mentioned, crypto, Bitcoin, etc., that are introduced in the market.
Thank you, Ruddy. Emma, perhaps some pointers your side on how DSB and Anna are thinking about the futures of markets as well.
Yeah, so I think, really great consideration has been placed on how we bridge the traditional and the emerging markets. I think standardization is an essential way forward. We need to recognize there are standards in place today and understand how fit for purpose they are to take us forward. When it comes to financial and referential instrument identification, similar to what Ruddy touched on as well, is that the standards really need to be technology agnostic. We can't have different standards based on the technology, because when we're talking about identifying these financial and referential instruments, that's irrespective of the technology. I also totally agree when it comes to the collaborative effort. I think recent statistics have mentioned that derivatives markets account for just over 50% of the crypto currencies traded. So that's, really shows that something has to be done to bring visibility and transparency to that area. So the DSB's product committee, it's something that has been raised, and we're looking at how the DSB can assist in that collaborative effort, given we have subject matter experts at the table from the industry, as well as the regulatory observers sitting there. So that's a really great forum to take those things forward. And, we've seen how important that collaboration is to have a successful outcome for these initiatives.
Thank you, Emma. And Alex, I'll just pass to you. How are ASIC and other regulators thinking about these new markets and when designing regulation? I'm sure you can't be too candid at the moment on certain things around crypto, but do you have any kind of comments on this and the future market?
Well, I think on crypto in particular, the Australian government is currently in the process of consulting, and what will probably be very much bound by the government's direction there, and we need to wait and see. So there's not much that I can comment. On the issue of how the regulators approach the making of rules and regulations that are sort of future-proof. Firstly, there's a general principle that in Australia we've traditionally approached this is to use the principles-based regulation that are not anchoring the here and there, but can be applied to future developments, and that they are technologically neutral, as a couple of panelists have mentioned. And again, just as Emma and Ruddy have mentioned as well, we feel it's important to have ongoing engagement and dialogue with the industry and the international regulatory community to understand the trends, the new markets, the informations. ASIC has put quite a bit of resources on our crypto working group, which is encompasses members from different teams engaging with ISDA, for instance, on the DRR project, things like that. And more specifically for future-proofing the OTC derivatives reporting framework, we are striving for a framework that will be fit for at least 10 years. We're hoping to achieve this by, first of all, extensive detailed consultation. Obviously, and Emma has mentioned the standard and Dawd, alignment with international standards and practices on UTI, UPI, ADI, and the data elements. Data elements against the theme that has come up that are as not agnostic as possible as to the asset class and product. Data elements that are components of a specific transaction and not themselves boxing transactions into a particular class or products. That has been problematic. We have, and you will see that in our consultation, methodically examined as many reporting scenarios as possible to test how they work in the most diverse circumstances, and trying to avoid as much as we can sort of doing things the ASIC way to maximize interoperability with other regimes. We might set out a preferred way of reporting something, but we also try to allow for alternatively accepting the way that is done in other jurisdictions. Well, having said that, we recognize that it's not possible to perfectly anticipate of future possibilities. But we are striving to have that modularized rules framework that in turn will lend itself to easier and more efficient rule change processes. And hopefully future kind of iteration or rule changes will not be as hurdle and time consuming as this current process is.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. So I think that's a good way to wrap up. I think a kind of a very positive kind of end to that panel. So we've run out of time. So I'd like to thank all the panelists here today for a fascinating conversation, and one I'm sure that we'll all revisit again in a year's time to see where we are with some of these developments. I'd like to thank Alex, Dawd, Emma and Ruddy for joining me today, and thank you all for listening. Coming up next, we have a 15-minute break where I encourage you to all get involved in a spot of networking and meet our sponsors. Also worth mentioning, our subscription team are at the booth today, so please do inquire if you're interested in taking out a subscription to Regulation Asia. We'll be back at 3:15, where we'll have a panel focusing on exchanges and safeguarding our markets, technology and supervisory approaches. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Bye.